And I like that you talk about belonging rather than simply connection or engagement. Belonging has a richer sense of purpose and unity.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Bloem, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen.
Okay, good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest who will introduce himself. Brian, please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Brian Adams. Live here in Cincinnati, have been for just a little while. Um, I am married to Carolyn, and we have five very beautiful children, ranging in ages from 19 to 11. So yes, I currently have uh, four teenagers, and the color of my hair probably indicates that. Um, and my passions in life are nature. I used to be a wildlife biologist,
Wow.
and um, building bridges of dialogue and respect between various groups. Um, and yeah, we'll probably get into other things when you talk about, what drives me and all of that. But those are some key identifiers are that I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints,
Mm-hmm.
uh, having converted when I was a teenager. And yeah, I'm just really glad to sit here with you,
Yeah.
Maurice, and learn from you.
No, and that's mutual. And it's we were at the same events, but we haven't met until now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking forward to that. And that's, also happened with some of your fellows of ACWAY who I actually, interviewed as well for this podcast. And I should have talked with them in South Africa, Cape Town, or in Brazil, which didn't happen. So those events are so big that it's impossible to talk with everybody. So I'm glad we can do that now. Um, Brian, what I always start by inviting the guests to bring us into the story, and you started doing that. When you think about belonging, and that's something that returns often in this podcast. Actually, I talked with Sarah Rahim also about belonging. Where did that begin for you, and what shaped your early sense of connection across difference?
I would say two things have shaped that. And I like that you talk about belonging rather than simply connection or engagement. Belonging has a richer sense of purpose and unity rather than just connection and interest, and even commonality or a common purpose. Two things. One is I'm a deeply curious person. That's probably um, my defining characteristic. Is I asked tons of questions. Drove my mother crazy when I was a little boy with all the questions I asked, and I haven't stopped since then. In fact, we should probably switch sides. I'd love to ask you a lot of questions. And the other was when I went to France as a missionary at 19 years old. I'm from Arkansas, which is a state in the southern U.S., known for its beautiful nature, but also its history of fraught race relations and immense poverty. And so I was raised in a home by a single mother who hadn't even finished 10th grade, with my two sisters. And so, immense poverty there, malnutrition and all kinds of, abuse issues that are often that accompany, very poor um, families and situations. And so going from that to Paris, France, the cosmopolitan capital of the world in many ways, it it was a shock and an eye opener. But I realized how I had an interest and a talent in learning from others from different religions and cultures. I kept in my journal a note of the people that I had met from around the world, not just bumped into, but with whom I had, been invited into their homes, had meals, and taught them the principles of our religion. And I think it was 72 different countries. Uh, and and I came back from that just knowing deep in my bones that this world is beautiful in its diversity, and that I want to be part of that and learning from it, and uh, contributing to strengthening that. So those are probably the
Mm.
two
Yeah.
the two main things.
And before you went to France, you already had um, converted to.
Yeah.
Okay, and but you were not brought up
Mm-mm.
with religion.
No,
So
no,
so what? So yeah, was there a moment then maybe
I
a
don't know.
threshold when yeah.
I had we were nominally Southern Baptist,
Mm.
but also a mix of Southern Methodist thrown in there as well, but not really professing anything in any meaningful way. We didn't have prayer in the home or read scriptures or even discuss or frame things uh, in that way. But from the youngest age that I know, I've always believed in God. And well, I can't say I was searching because I didn't really have this concept that, um, you know, a particular church would be his here on the earth or a particular religious path. I still was open to religiosity and spirituality. And then when I discovered the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it really clicked. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me. I like that. And yeah, and it's been an enormous blessing to in my life ever since.
And piggybacking further on, you be in contact with different faiths. Um, and looking at what you're doing and you're very much involved in interfaith work. Um, again, was there a moment that, you realized that interfaith dialogue wasn't something you studied, but something you had to live?
Oh yeah. Um, so I think that moment, because I can think of a moment when it kind of all came together. It grew out of something before that, though, like many things do. And one thing that I learned in France as a missionary was I had a love for, and even one might say a talent for other languages. And when you learn a second or third or fourth language, it's not like you're suddenly saying, "Oh, French is so much better than English. I'm gonna get rid of stupid English and just speak French." Or in fact, what happens is you understand your language better. Like I'm a better speaker of English and a writer in English because I learned French and other languages. It gives you that opportunity to reflect on, stuff that you would not normally have even had a frame with which to apply to any reflection. And so I continued to do that as I was building my career internationally. But So the time for interfaith dialogue, when it really clicked with me, was when I was working in Mali. I was at the Institut du Sahel, which is the Sahel Institute, and it had researchers from across the Sahel region, all the countries represented. USAID funded institute, and I had lived in Tanzania before that and studied and learned Kiswahili, and I'd done a bit of work in Kenya and Uganda. I was in Bamako, Mali at this point, um, and I realized that the USAID staff from the US and from some of the European countries had a very different um, relationship with the researchers at the Institut du Sahel than I did. And I began to look at that and I realized that one of the big reasons was while I wasn't Muslim, Bamako, as the capital of Mali, Mali's 93%, it's a Muslim majority country, roughly 93% are Muslim. Um, that it wasn't that I was Muslim that connected with them, but the fact that I had a religion and I wasn't um, shy about weaving religion into when I was talking with them, which they related to. Like, we get you. These others who don't, who keep their religion, if they even have it, very separate, we respect it, but we don't get them. And I realized, that having that openness to something that's deep and important to us is powerful. It impacted the relationships that we had, which, as you probably realize, as a researcher, relationship can drive the strength of the product that comes out of that collaboration. And so that's when I began to be conscious of and take seriously this idea of interfaith interfaith engagement. But it wasn't really dialogue at that time. That came later um, as I did my PhD at the University of Queensland in Australia, um, and then it grew from there.
How did you end up in Australia? As a
Oh well, I started a PhD at Michigan State University
Mhm.
in geography in East Lansing, Michigan, and it was a very, very good program. But my focus was on international development, which I had been doing for a number of years. Um, but I had grown a bit disillusioned with it, dissatisfied, and realized, this isn't the space where I want to make my contribution. And so I stepped out of the program and chose to go into conflict resolution and dialogue. And so I was very fortunate to be selected as in the second cohort of Rotary Peace Fellows that as part of that program, you have to study outside of your home country. And they have certain centers around the world. One was in Paris at Sciences Po, the Institut d'études politiques in Paris, um, which I spent a year as a fellow there, and then transferred to the program at the University of Queensland in Australia. So my wife and I, we had just married before we moved to France, and then we moved to Australia from there. And I did a master's in mediation and conflict resolution, so a second master's degree, and then did a PhD in political science, but around dialogue and conflict resolution. Mhm. And then got a wonderful position at Griffith University, where I founded the Center for Interfaith and Cultural Dialogue, and we made a wonderful life for ourselves there. Had our children there, and um, loved it. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned um, that you received the Rotary Peace Fellowship. Um, yeah, if you think about it, what did that do that still shapes your leadership today?
That shapes my leadership today. Um, yeah, that's a good question. Um, what it did, um, more than giving me, say, legitimacy in conflict resolution field, because I went on for a PhD after that, that I think really strengthened the legitimacy. What it gave me was, it gave me articulation of a passion. I absolutely loved it. Loved conflict resolution work and the people I met. And um, I realized, I found my space. I found my people. I found my mission, if you want to call it that. Um, that's that's probably the biggest thing that it gave me, which still impacts my leadership to this day.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Mhm.
Um, I would like to ask you about, because you are really behind or in front of ACWAY, and
Mhm.
through ACWAY you work with young leaders around the world. What if these young people taught you about dialogue that you didn't fully see when you began this journey?
I am the chair of the board of trustees for ACWAY, which is it's an acronym for a common word among the youth. And in terms of leadership, I have two roles. One is as chair of ACWAY, and the other is I'm an advisor to a consultancy group called Lead Integrity. That's around strengthening leadership to um, be more inclusive, especially of religious views and perspectives. It was founded by Azza Karam and some other absolutely fabulous women leaders, and yeah, it's been a great opportunity. So when I think of leadership, I think of those two roles. But Ackway, in particular, is is a love of mine. I've been with them from almost the very beginning. And but that question, yeah, what have I learned from them? It's related to one of the questions you sent me, and you often ask your those that you interview around hope. What gives you hope? And working with youth is mostly what gives me hope. There are probably two sources of hope that I have and the challenges that I live through and we face in the world. But working with youth is one. So what I've learned in terms of dialogue with the youth is I guess to characterize it, it's it's more direct and open with youth than say with my generation. Um, we like to think of us as being a bit more um, sophisticated or careful, and the youth they don't embrace that as we try to, which is one of the big divides I've seen in bringing youth on board with some of our dialogue platforms is we kind of try to impose upon them the norms that we have in our dialogue while saying, hey, we want you to be leaders, we want you to be, and the reality is we don't. We want them to be like us and say what we want them to say. And, that's you're not going to learn from them if that's the case. There are, of course, other challenges to that, but that's one of the ones that I've noticed that we often don't talk about in dialogue with the youth. So at ease with discomfort and talking about things in ways that we normally wouldn't, perhaps is something I've learned from working with the youth.
I'm going to kind of try to unpack this further. What I've noticed, Brian, in talking with a lot of younger uh, fellows of Arkway, is that I think Arkway's work often challenges what I call to put down the ducky, and it goes back to the skit of Ernie in this,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
where
Mhm.
he,
On
you know,
Sesame Street. Bert
yes,
and Ernie, yeah.
and Ernie is trying to learn how to play the saxophone, but he walks around with his ducky and he doesn't put his ducky down, so you hear the
Mhm.
squeaky sound all the time. Until the band leader says, "If you really want to learn how to play the saxophone, put your ducky down." So,
Mhm.
to leave behind assumptions or habits, to get in well, that's often getting in the way of real connection, and that's starting that dialogue. So,
Yeah.
what duckies do you see youth having to put down to become true bridge builders?
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to ask me what duckies I have to put down.
That's the second
Um,
part.
okay. um, so what duckies do they have to put down? Um, one of the duckies I've seen that youth have to put down is the ducky of impatience. Um, Youth in general want to get it done, want to be heard, and to want to be accepted, want to get things done. And so duckies aren't bad. And that's what I understand you mean by this. But sometimes they can get in the way of this connection and this bridge building. And some youth have to um, put down their impatience with structures that are there, or old people like me, uh, and build a bit more before they can achieve what they want. Um, and that's a challenge. I mean, because that's one of the strengths, is this energy and this passion and this willingness to push through and even reassess structures. And that's powerful and it's needed. But it can sometimes get in the way of building bridges and of building platforms. I
Mm.
often think of for dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and as you correctly said, a ducky is not necessarily a bad thing, and you can pick it up later.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's
That's
part
right.
of who you are and you need it,
Hmm.
right? So,
Yeah.
um, okay, well, yeah. What about your own ducky?
My own ducky, probably one ducky that I have learned I had to set down is a desire to be liked. Um, if you want the other person to like you, that's a very different exchange than if you want that person to respect you or your views. And so that's something that's personal to me and to other people, of course, too, but maybe not broadly. That I have to set down when I'm like, no, am I serious about um, resolving some issue or conflict in a way that's sustainable and mutually beneficial, and produces an outcome that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't come together in this setting of respect. Then that's one of them that I have to set down, is to be liked.
Yeah, you have to forgive me because I'm really intrigued by ACWAY. So I have a lot of questions about all the work that you
Oh,
are
sure.
doing. But before we go deeper, let me check if I understand this correctly for our listeners. So ACWAY developed what you call the Interfaith Development Goals.
Mhm.
Also, you call it the IDGs, and I have questions about the inner
Yeah.
development goals to you as
Yeah.
well. So, but
Yeah.
now this is about interfaith development goals. It was a framework, I think, created by youth from around the world to guide
Mhm.
respectful, peaceful, and collaborative engagement about
Mhm.
religious and cultural differences. They are not like the UN SDGs or the IDGs, but rather a set of shared values and commitments that help people work together across divides. Is that
Yeah.
correct? I'm
Yes, I
describing that
would. I
correct?
I would add one thing to
Oh,
it, in that one of the challenges with the Sustainable Development Goals is there's not explicit, it's certainly when they were laid out, there's more growth in this direction, but there's not explicit engagement with spiritual, religious, philosophical beliefs and traditions. And we feel that these IDGs are, when taken on board sincerely, can help facilitate that engagement with faith communities and philosophical traditions to strengthen the SDGs. So I think it's an important component to leading to the success of the SDGs.
Okay, understood. So I had a
Mm,
question about what gap are you trying to fill? That's
mhm.
you kind of
Yep,
touched
there you
upon that
go.
now, and I okay. Then my question about the interfaith development goals. Um, when you look at those interfaith development goals, is there one that you personally return to most in your daily leadership, and why
Oh,
that
yeah.
one?
Yeah, good question. Um, I would say there are two. Okay. One is number two, the peace through dialogue. I see dialogue as a tool that can be used in a number of contexts and issues, um, be it educational, environmental, policy development, all kinds. So that is one. And I like that it's framed as peace through dialogue, not just simply resolution through dialogue or something like that. And that shapes the dialogue process. My background is around dialogue um, and the processes that lead to the outcomes. That was what my PhD was on, was the process of dialogue rather than simply the outcomes. And the other one is religion as a tool for peace. Those are probably the two that I see. I do a lot of my work has been, I feel, motivated by a desire to re-legitimize religious, spiritual, philosophical views and contributions to public debate and policy. There's a balance there, separation of church and state, which I fully support. But many secular systems have kind of gone to the point of that means erasing from our projects and programs and policies religious framing or religious justification for driving these things, and I think we need to re-legitimize that.
But you're clearly walking the talk, because I think this is a segue to you're one of the architects of the G20 Interfaith Forum. And what did you see at the time that you think this platform needed is needed needs to
Yeah,
exist?
yeah, thank you for that. I think the G20 Interfaith Forum is one of the highest profile manifestations of what I was just talking about, in which when the G20 came to Australia, when Australia hosted the G20 in 2014, there's of course a lead up to that, and I um I I guess what triggered it was the vice chancellor of the university said, "I want all of the units on campus to think of how they can contribute to the G20 that's taking place here." And so I pondered it, as a Center for Interfaith and Cultural Dialogue. I thought, how can we do this? And I sat with a good friend of mine, Ari Heber, an Orthodox Jew there in Brisbane, who was a frequent contributor, advisor, participant in the activities of our interfaith work. And we discussed this, and he said, how about if you have an interfaith summit? I thought that's brilliant. I like that. But I wanted to take it a little further, not just have religious figures come together under the rubric, fanfare of the G20. But I thought, bringing them together, what can that lead to? And, and so we decided, I took another closer look at the G20 and its consultative process. And they have a number of consulting groups they have. And it depends on each year which country hosts it, which ones they allow or they listen to. But you have the L20 for labor, the W20 for women, the Y20 for youth, the B20 for business, the C20 for civil society, but they didn't have any express religious path for religious voices to contribute to the G20 agenda. And I mean, if you're talking about the 20 largest economies in the world, the impact they have on economic policy is enormous. But the reality is, religious views, beliefs, traditions drive a lot of economic decision making at the individual, household, and community levels. And so to not have um, an explicit engagement with that, or a way to take from that things that can strengthen their economic policy decision making, was a gap that I thought, we need to change that, or we need to at least try to fill that gap. And so that's what drove me to create the concept for the G20 Interfaith Forum.
Mm. And looking back, what was the hardest part of convincing global actors to take interfaith engagement seriously? And what sustains you in that process?
Um, so uh, yeah, that's a good question. Well, you have a couple questions there. Some of the challenges mm, are that interfaith is often seen as more performative or demonstrative than generative. And by that, I mean, not just in terms of the G20, but lots of work that I've done around interfaith is, let's, it, it's meaningful to have people who clearly are different in their beliefs, by how they dress and, what they profess. But it often ends there. When you're engaging with policymakers, they don't, they generally don't like to go deeper than what the show is. Um, and I feel that there's a generative component to interfaith dialogue, in which what is produced from that, what comes out of that would not have been there if they hadn't come together. And that can be policy, that can be innovative ideas, social or even economic. There's a lot that can come out of that. And so that has been one of the challenges, is saying, no, look, this isn't just um, statements. This isn't just an opportunity to talk. Or it isn't even, which is also very good, an opportunity to bring people together who normally wouldn't talk. But it's what good comes out of this, of substantive value. So that's been one of the big meta challenges in this space.
And Brian, if you could redesign the G20 Interfaith Forum today, knowing what you know now about the polarization, the politics, the youth,
Yeah, yeah.
is there anything that you would do differently?
Uh, well, I have not been part of the G20 leadership for a number of years.
Mhm.
So I have to respect that the leadership is, doing their thing and what they feel is best. And it's not for me to try to put my finger on the scale, or to um, how can I say, speak in an authoritative manner about where they're going. I, of course, have given, I have publications in very good um, books that discuss, challenges with the current and past, when I was there as well, the G20 Interfaith Forum. So I just want to be sensitive to that. But um, some things that I had hoped we would do that I see as being of great value. Um, is having tighter youth engagement, meaning have youth involved as equal partners in designing the fora, as well as participating in it. Um, have greater regional dialogue platforms that feed into the larger G20 Interfaith Forum or the higher level G20 Interfaith Forum. Uh, because I think one thing we could do, we could have done better when I was in the leadership of it, was strengthen the interfaith dialogue infrastructure in each of the countries um, where we gathered, rather than keeping it at a high level international conference. Have s- when we left a strengthened infrastructure of legitimacy, contacts, even financial support for interfaith dialogue where we gathered. We missed opportunities there. So those are some of the things.
Yeah. And what I understood from talking with, some of the youth of ACWAY is that actually maybe that ACWAY has set that up in a sense because you're not
Mhm.
only participating in the
That's
G20
right.
Interfaith Forum, but you're also continuously discussing in the different regions as well. So maybe that's something to look into.
Yeah, yeah.
But I
That's
would,
one thing
yes,
that
sir.
I've really enjoyed about Acway is
Hmm.
it's allowed me to achieve some of the things that I wasn't able to achieve with the
Hmm.
G20 Interfaith Forum. And one of the I didn't start Acway, and I don't make that claim. One of the part of the brilliance of Rawad Mayoub, who is the founder of
Hmm.
Acway, and his vision was um, he did for youth what I did for the G20 interfaith, in which he saw, you know, we keep trying to be participants and taking on equally, but actually we're not getting there. Let's just start our own platform. Let's, we talk about having youth at the table. Well, let's just build our own table. And that's what in essence, that's what I did with the G20 Interfaith Forum is, the C the civil society consultative group in Australia at the time wasn't really interested in having a strong engagement in this space, and so we just kind of said, "Well, let's let's set our own table," and that's what Rawad has done with Acway is let's have an organization. It's not just focused on youth; it's led by youth, um, and um, yeah, and so that's been the brilliance of his work, of his contribution, I think.
Um,
Did that answer your question? I
yeah,
may have
yes,
gotten a
yes,
bit
yes,
off
yes.
track
No,
there.
no, no. You did, you did. Thanks. I would like to go to the inner development goals.
Mhm.
So from the inner development goals perspective, the being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting.
Okay.
And then under that, there are at the moment, uh, how many? 20,
25 or something like that?
25, yes, to
Yeah.
have been added recently. Forgiveness and resilience, I think, are the new ones. Um, which capacities do you see youth most urgently needing today to navigate interreligious and intercultural conflict?
So of those 5, they're all important. One thing about youth, um, is many of them, I mean, youth, it's a range, 18 to 35 is often considered kind of the youth space. Um, some of them are still cultivating their inner life, right? That being. Um, uh, and some of them are still trying to understand the complex world in which we live and how to think about it and engage with it. And so it's hard to say which one of those youth in general need, but youth movements such as Acway or some others, I think it's the the later two, or the two that are off to the side, about collaborating and acting. There's a desire to act, uh, but not opportunity or knowing how to. And there's a lot of learning on how to collaborate still to take place, I think. Not just participate together, but actually collaborating is um is a challenge for youth movements or uh and this is broadly United Religions Initiative, for example, is learning, and I think they're leading on this idea of youth collaboration. They're doing really well in that space. ACWAY, we're doing well, but we're challenged because we're small, and so organizations like CAICID, the King Abdulaziz International Center for Interfaith and Intercultural Dialogue, now based in Lisbon, they have a very strong youth program, and they do great work. I've been an advisor on their work in the past, but there's this power differential when they engage with other youth movements or organizations and tend to take over. And so there's still a challenge to collaboration, I think, of the five inner development goals.
And which of the IDG's capacity skills do you personally struggle with? And how do you work on it?
Um, I would say the one I struggle the most with is cultivating this inner life, uh, because being isn't static. Um, as it's defined in the inner development goals, their conceptualization of it. It's not just being in the present in kind of a Buddhist meditative um, frame. Um, it's life is stochastic, and so being means you have to change and readjust and reevaluate and grow. Um, I think being means growing in our world, and so that takes work. And the more conscious I am about it, the more work I realize it takes. I'm a father of five, and just being a father means I have to change. I have to change some of my views, my approaches, my preferences, my understanding, my vocabulary, and um, so. But what helps in being is um, is learning from others and reflecting on that, and having a willingness to do it. It's yeah.
Thanks, Brian. Um, you know, interface work um, is deeply meaningful and important, but I guess also very exhausting. Um, what do you
Yeah,
personally do to stay grounded or centered?
even discouraging at times. What do I do to stay grounded or centered in interfaith work? One is I try to keep in mind why I'm doing it. Again, like I mentioned, my PhD was around the process rather than the outcomes. If you tie the value of your work to outcomes, especially in something like dialogue, you're tying yourself to something you have very little control over. Um, but for me, I have three things that motivate me in the work that I do, in the life that I try to lead. One is, can I provide for my family? I think my utmost responsibility is to um, the home for which I'm responsible. So my wife and my children and those who come in my care. And so providing for that is core essential. Another one, as I mentioned to you earlier, is I'm driven by curiosity. I I have to learn and grow and discover and explore in my life. That's just who I am. And fortunately, interfaith dialogue is a great way to do that. Uh, and then third is through my work, through my contribution to the world, I want to further God's work. And I feel that He is the Father of us all. And so anything I do that benefits His children, writ large, is is advancing His work. And so I think interfaith dialogue is an undeniably essential tool in advancing His work, to bless His children on the earth. And so, um, reminding myself of that, and that's why I'm in it, rather than, you know, did I succeed in uh, establishing, um, such and such initiative, or did that end up somewhere where I didn't see it going, and I don't think it should. Those are challenging and disappointing, and cause me to reflect on myself as a professional and to improve. But it doesn't take away that motivation that I have for engaging in interfaith dialogue. But it's also very rewarding. It can be discouraging and challenging, but it's very rewarding. I mentioned earlier about learning foreign languages and the things that that does. Well, that's interfaith dialogue is like learning a foreign language. It helps me understand myself and my own beliefs better and become a better Latter-day Saint. But also it opens doors to perspectives and minds and vocabularies and opportunities and friendships and relationships that I never would have had if I hadn't engaged in it. Just like, you speak multiple languages, just like if has happened with you if you hadn't learned these other languages as well.
Talking about these languages, I really appreciate, you brought it up in the beginning, and how I think learning those languages reshaped your relationship with listening and understanding. Um, yeah, is there a moment where language, spoken or cultural, either unlocked connection or blocked it entirely?
Yeah, I say yes because I'm sure language is so important that it
Mm.
would be a key um, door opener or door barrer, or locker. Um, can I think of examples when? Um, I'll give one example. So, serving as a member for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as a missionary for the church in France, was very challenging. Uh, um, Culturally and religiously, um, this religion is viewed very differently um, in France than it is in the United States, right? And so, even though I worked very, very hard to uh, learn the language, um, it still didn't open all the doors that one would think it would. Because I also was, very clearly a representative of this religion, and so it colored my engagement with the French people. I loved my time there, absolutely, but it was challenging. And so I remember returning to France with a friend of mine. He was coming back from Africa. I was on my way to Africa, and we met in France. And I said to him, just be careful. The French are wonderful, but they're what they call méfiant. They're wary, and they're hard to get to know. But once they know you, they're your friend for life. But it can be brusque and challenging. And he's like, okay, well, that was not the experience we had. We had so many people just open their doors to us. We had people say, "Oh, you guys are riding through the Loire Valley on your bikes. Have you seen such and such chateau?" No. Oh, well, here's 50 francs to go see it. Or oh, come have dinner with us. We'd love. And my friend kept saying, what is going on? These are not the French people you described to me. And I realized that because I spoke French very well for a foreigner, an American in particular, um, that the French people loved it. They were so strengthened by it and reinforced, the fact that I recognize the beauty of their language. And so it opened doors. And so that's the power of language, but also language is couched in context where I spoke the language the exact same way
Mhm.
just a few months before, and doors were literally closed
Mhm.
to me. And so I can't say that it's language that did one or the other, but it's the context in which the language was used that drove that either opened or closed doors.
Mm. Right. I like that. I like that
So a
story.
bit of nuance
Yeah, yeah,
with
yeah,
that
yeah.
idea.
Um, and you talk about connection, and it says, and that's the first step in getting into dialogue with each other as well. It's important. What I hope that this podcast contributes to is that connection. That you listen to the different guests that I have on this podcast.
Mhm.
You might not agree with everything they say, or you might not agree with 99% of the stuff that they say, but there is this 1% that is
Yeah.
this opening for, connection and then dialogue. Um, I have kind of a question around that. So I have always a question of a previous guest then,
Uh-huh.
for the present guest to establish that connection. And the previous guest um, is asking you,
What does humility mean to you?
Humility to me is a recognition that there is um, available to me uh, greater knowledge, experience, insight than I currently have. Um, Often that is framed in terms of a divine being, our Father in heaven, who is, of course, the source of all that. But it's deeper than that, and probably more applicable on a day-to-day basis to recognize that that is also the case with other people that you meet. So that's what I understand humility as being. And maybe that definition is driven by, the sense of curiosity that I have and kind of would frame how I would think of humility, but that's kind of how I see it.
yeah, your question for the next guest.
That's been challenging, to be honest, to try to come up with something, but it's rooted in this idea of hope that you mentioned earlier. Um, so there are a couple things that give me hope. We didn't, go into
Mhm.
exhaustive detail on what those are, but one of them is I find hope in how my experiences um, give lie to a lot of what is being said about others out there. And what I mean is, we may frame others as different, therefore bad. And politically, there's a lot out there that says, Democrats, they're left wing, crazy extremists that hate our country and want to destroy our society, or right wing, they just want authoritarians, and they don't really care about the Constitution. They just want power and to oppress those that are different from them, so on and so forth. You're loonies, you're awful, you're evil, you're stupid, all of this stuff. But the hope I get is that's not reality. I have, uh, I come from Arkansas, so a whole lot of my family um, have a very strong right wing political view or right political view. I'm an academic, so a lot of my colleagues have a very strong progressive liberal view. And the reality is, there are fabulous, kind, loving, good people in in academia and in Arkansas, to put it in that way. And so the hope I have is people aren't really what they're made out to um, be it immigrants or African Americans or Muslims or Catholics or any of these, gross categories that are often maligned or easily maligned by people who don't know them or engage with them. And the reality is they're not like that. And because it's not like that, there are um, threads that can be used from all these sides to weave a very strong, beautiful fabric of our society. That's a bit of the hope that I see or that I draw upon. So the question that I have then, I apologize for that long lead up, is what are you doing to not just get to know, but serve somebody who isn't um, considered part of your group, however you would frame that?
Okay, I like that. Um, yeah, you mentioned that coming up with this question for the next guest was difficult. I come up with a even more difficult question according to the majority of my guests, and that's the following, because I like music, so I have always a
Oh,
question
yeah.
about music. So if I ask you to come up with a song or a piece of music um, that represents, for the big part, who you are, what you are about, which
Yeah.
song or piece of music would that be, and why?
I've been thinking of it. And because we are in the Christmas season here for us in Cincinnati and, many Western liberal nations, excuse me, I thought I would do a Christmas song. And it's my very favorite, right? And it's Oh Holy Night. And the reason why I would choose this one is it does a couple things in the song. It has three verses that I'm aware of. There may be more, but we often only sing the first one, which is, you know, um, recognizing the great event that is taking place the night of Christ's birth, right? But the song actually does more than that, and that as a believer in God, it's what I think we should make the connection, not just celebrate the fact that, this great gift that is the Savior of the world, given to the world, and acknowledge that and, shout praises about that. But kind of what verse 3 talks about, and I'll read that if that's okay, just so it helps the listener. But truly, he taught us to love one another. His law is love, and his gospel is peace. Chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother, and in his name all oppression shall cease. And so this hymn, this song, this Christmas carol that everybody knows the first verse of is actually saying, as I understand it, this is great and let's celebrate it. But this is why he came, was so this can be possible. And so if we're singing verse 1, we should seriously be singing and practicing verse 3. So that's a song that hits me.
Hmm. And maybe two quick questions around that. And Brian, is that, do you think that song, okay, it's the season as well, so that's maybe one of the reasons that you came up with it,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
is it also something that's related to what's going on in the world at the moment? That's why, this song is came to the surface.
Maybe. There is a lot of, I'll use that word again, performative religiosity in the world. Um, I, and this is something that I'm challenged with is uh, even people of my own faith, they really like the verse 1 of their life, praising this great thing that is their religion, their beliefs, while saying and voting for things that counter verse 3 in their life, and I so maybe that's why. And maybe that's why I wanted to emphasize,
Mhm.
verse 3 of this and not just sing verse 1.
Okay.
Um,
Um, what I do is I add all the songs that have been selected by my guest to a playlist on Spotify. So a quick question: is there a special rendition that you would like me to pick, or that you have in mind?
um, I think Faith Hill
Okay.
did a beautiful rendition of it,
Okay.
uh, where I think she does all 3 verses. Um, that it that might be a good one.
Okay.
Not Martina McBride. She did a version of it, and I don't think she did all 3 verses of it. She has a wonderful voice, but I want to give you one that has all 3 verses, and Faith Hill does a beautiful version of it. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir also has a beautiful version of it too.
Okay.
They're now called though when they did it, they were the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. They're now called the Choir at Temple Square or something like that. There's been a rebranding of their name. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Um, these conversations always go fast.
Mhm.
So, I really am fascinated by everything you've shared. So I'm really thankful for that. Um, but what I wanted to ask you though is I'm forgetting his name now, but there is a this is the second week I'm forgetting the name, so I have to do something about it. But
Mhm.
it's a CBS a program um, where he is looking at the potential of a small act of kindness. And so I have
Yeah.
two questions around the small act of kindness. Is one is what are
Is
your
that
thoughts?
Steve Hartman
Steve
you're
Hartman,
thinking of?
yes, Steve Hartman, correct. Um, but so yeah, two questions around the simple act of kindness. One is what are your thoughts around a simple act of kindness, and especially in terms of its potential um, to expand, to go on. Um, and then the second question that I have is if I ask you to come up with one simple act of kindness this week, what would you do?
The simple act of kindness. That, that ties into the question that I would ask the next, interviewee in that, um, when you serve someone else, you, I realize your listeners aren't all of the same, religious background as me, and so please pardon me if I do get, kind of more specific in my own religious view. But um, when you serve another, you are re there are a couple things that happen. Um, and this is what the Savior demonstrated, I think, when he came to earth and the greatest of all, yet he was the servant of all. One is you configure any power differential between you. Um, Two, you are demonstrating in a very clear way um, that you value that other person. And one, that you value them enough to give something of yourself to them. But two, you value them enough to recognize that they may have something that uh, is needed for them, and that you have taken the time or whatever it is to know what that is, or to feel that you know what that is, and be willing to offer that. Um, and those reasons overcome a lot of barriers, which is so that's part of the motivation behind asking that particular question. How are you? And I chose that term to serve someone who is not of your group. But in so doing, you also learn from them, um, which creates this reciprocal tie. So often, when someone does something nice for you, you want to do something nice for them. It's human. It's human nature. It's physiological, not just emotional or psychological. And but the challenge then is, how does it go from them to somebody else? And that is a big question I would want to talk with Steve Hartman about. Is serving and doing an act of kindness can often then reflect back onto you because they are willing to do the same for you or something for you. But how do you move that to go on to someone else? Now, I think the general thought is, if you do it to a stranger who has no connection to you, they still will have this desire to do something kind. And since you are no longer, an option for them to reciprocate, then hopefully they will move that forward to someone else. But I don't know how strong that assumption is in reality. Um, so those are my thoughts around an act of kindness, a simple act of kindness. And the one that I will commit to is, I have a friend, I've just returned from traveling, who's been in the hospital for surgery, and I'll go and visit him.
Okay. And to come back to your, the power to replicate or the potential, maybe it is related also, and I've heard that for the first time in the States actually, is paying it forward,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It's related with that. I mean, you're right in terms of,
Yeah.
because then I've experienced that myself when we were going for a coffee somewhere, and you have these drive-throughs in the States.
Hmm.
Well, we have them now also in Europe, but I did not grow up with it. So
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really associate it still with the US. But,
Yes.
we ordered that and then we wanted to pay. And then the person behind the counter said, well, it's already paid for. And the car was
Yeah.
gone, right?
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah. That's
really a
right.
nice feeling in terms
Hmm.
of joy and yeah, humans can be nice.
Yeah. That's right.
And it gives you a positive boost. And
Hmm.
as a result, actually, we have done things, because we experienced that. So we try to
Yeah. Good.
mimic
That's good.
and replicate that. So from my point of view, it does have, the potential
Yeah.
to replicate, to make this world a little bit better. Um, Brian, yeah, I would like to thank you for today. But before we close, is there any question that I did not ask you today that I should have asked?
Well, not that you should have, but one that I thought you were going to ask is,
Yeah.
what current projects are you
Oh,
working on, or something like that?
yes.
Yeah.
I was hammering on the Aquay because I'm so inspired with everything. Yes, so please
Yeah.
tell us.
So I'm semi-retired.
Mhm.
I'm a stay-at-home dad now, while my wife is continuing her studies and working. And so that's been a big change, big
Mm.
growth on my part, to go from, heading up a center at a large university, advising governments and officials around the world, to um, buying groceries, deciding what, you know, our kids will eat, and, taking them to games and all of that. That's been a big change, and a big growth, and um, a big source of blessings. But in addition to that, I've been writing. And so I've written a book on leadership that I hope to get published. Um, it's around aspirational leadership and leaders who help others aspire and work towards aspirations. And the other is, I'm working on a series, a fantasy series for teens, young adults, around, it's a long-winded allegory around the value of collaborating across difference.
Mm.
And so that's what I
Wow.
finished book one, and I'm looking for an agent who will assess it and see. And I'm working on books two and three right now. Yeah. So that's
Okay.
just a little something on the side.
Great. That's I'm yeah, keep us informed about that. And I will, what I can tell you is that, now I have to think when that was. I think a year ago or more. I interviewed, actually, a publisher, uh, of this podcast. And what is great of that particular publisher is that, it also brings, and he works very closely with the authors, listen to what do you want, and is very transparent about the earnings, so everybody knows, and
Yeah.
so which is often tricky, right, in terms of business. How much is the cut for the author and this and
Yeah.
that? So I will. It's Tim is his first name, and I'm blanking on his last name, but I can let you. Now, one of my listeners will tell me. This was.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know it myself anymore, but so yeah, looking forward to that, Brian, and yeah, thanks for all you do and for who you are, and all the best.
Ja, thank you. Dank u.
Alsjeblieft.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.